The knock came at 3:11 a.m., 3 taps in the exact rhythm that had been living rent-free in my skull since the night Karen slipped into her own flower bed. I was upright before the echo died, rain thrashing the windows like it wanted in more than whoever stood at my door. The peephole showed nobody. Just my porch light jittering in the wind and a small black parcel, centered on the mat like a dare. I opened the door, brought it inside, locked both deadbolts, and set the box on the counter the way you set down a snake you're trying not to wake. Inside was a brass connector, twin to the ones I'd fed to the storm. Someone had engraved 2 words along the rim: "Admit it." Beneath it lay a thumb drive sealed in plastic, and under that a printed notice with a city seal. From across the room the letter looked official. Up close the logo sat a fraction low, the signature was more blur than name, and the sentences read like a policy manual practicing small talk. Theater, not authority. The drive held one file, gutter_truth.mp4. Night vision green filled the screen. There I was, hood up, hose in hand, crossing the street. Karen's old downspout, my repaired hose, the act I'd done once and locked in the quiet room where guilt keeps its shoes. The timestamps insisted it happened last week. The edit was tidy enough to convince anyone who prefers belief over effort. But at 23 seconds the rain in the top left corner repeated itself, a loop pretending to be weather. Near the end the time bar hiccuped backward 3 seconds and leapt forward again. Nature doesn't stutter on cue. I took screenshots, emailed them to myself and to Rick, then made coffee strong enough to remove paint. At 8:15 a.m. White City truck stopped at my curb. The inspector who climbed out was young, clipboard crisp, the kind of calm that makes people confess to stealing their own mail. He introduced himself as Nolan and said a complaint had been filed for unlawful water diversion. I invited him in. Guilty people block thresholds. He studied the printed notice and frowned at the fonts like they'd insulted his family. When I played the video, he watched without blinking and asked to copy it for chain of custody. When the looped rain ticked by, he leaned closer and murmured, "Artifact." He photographed my hose bib, measured the side yard slope, wrote careful notes, then said he'd file a preliminary statement that the submission appeared digitally nonconforming. Bureaucratic for probably fake. Rick texted before the taillights faded. "Come over, you'll want to see this." His place smelled like primer and second chances. He had last night's security feed up on his monitor. We watched rain turn the driveway into static. At 11:58 a.m. figure slid along my side fence, hooded, slight. Lightning cracked and a narrow pale face flashed and vanished. My brain helpfully labeled it Karen because brains adore simple ghost. Rick paused and zoomed, which mostly produced bigger blur, then switched to the gate camera. Headlights washed across wet pavement and a gray Camry rolled by slow enough to read its intentions out loud. Mark had installed a plate reader at the entrance after last year's package theft. People complained until their blenders stopped disappearing. 5 minutes after Rick pinged him, Mark replied with a partial plate registered 2 neighborhoods over. Trickier part, he added, the car's owner shared a last name with our favorite gutter contractor. Money and pride are patient. The contractor ate a free rehang after Karen's melodrama and a garden of 1-star reviews she scattered like birdseed. If his nephew owned a camera and a grudge, the rest wrote itself. I walked home through drizzle that smelled like wet pennies and found another envelope tucked just inside my screen door. This one was real. County seal. Docket number. Hearing date in 3 weeks. Karen had filed a harassment claim in the jurisdiction where she'd fled, alleging I'd orchestrated surveillance and water attacks by proxy. Her restraining order had sunset when she moved. She'd simply reached a courthouse first with a cleaner story. On paper it was neat and sympathetic. A woman escapes a hostile street and the hostility follows her online. The record showed me as clever, sarcastic, and once very creative with a hose. I boiled more water because boiling water gives your hands something to do when your pulse is trying to sprint lap. Dave wandered over under a hood and listened while I summarized. He grimaced and produced a photo from 2 nights ago, a gray Camry idling by the mailboxes, cracked taillight, bumper scar. Retired mechanics don't trust memory when a camera will do. By late afternoon the sky went the color of old nickel. I sat at my window with a legal pad and made a 2-column list the way my father taught me when life insisted on guessing games. Left side, things I could prove. Video loops, license partial, Nolan's note, the typography on the bogus letter. Right side, things that could be insinuated, prior conflict, my sense of humor, a past rainstorm I had admittedly encouraged. The right side shouted. The left side built a file. At 9 the rain returned, soft at first, then steadier, the drumroll no one asked for. An email arrived from an address assembled out of hardware aisle parts. Subject: kindly stop, Daniel. The body was 1 sentence. The city knows now, admit it at the hearing and save everyone time. No threats, no profanity, just a tight smile in text. I typed a reply, deleted it, then re-watched the clip in slow motion. The reflection in Karen's old front window betrayed a detail the editor missed. The person holding the hose wore a jacket with a thin reflective safety stripe at the wrist. I don't own one. The contractor's nephew did. His social posts were full of weekend job photos in the same gear. I sent the still to Mark and Rick with a line short enough to say in one breath, "Not a ghost, a contractor with a hobby." Rick promised to mirror his archives and keep redundant copies offsite. Mark said he'd call the contractor in the morning and ask polite questions that sounded like subpoenas. I set the newest connector beside the others on my counter and watched the rain stitch silver threads down the glass. The knock didn't return. It didn't need to. The message had shifted from haunting to leverage. Someone wanted me to fold. Someone wanted the neighborhood to remember who used to run it and who still knew where all the buttons were. Just after 10, Nolan called back. He'd already asked the city's IT unit to pull radar data for the exact minute the video claimed. If the rain signature didn't match what fell on our block, we'd have more than a hunch. He also mentioned that anonymous submissions from the same email had targeted 2 other residents this year. Small, precise complaints about a fence height and a shed setback that evaporated. Under inspection. Whoever this was liked making people spend Saturdays proving they were normal. I thanked him, set an early alarm, and pulled the blinds. Across the street Rick's windows glowed steady. He waved through the glass with the easy confidence of a man who believes in nails, levels, and receipt. I waved back and let my pulse level out. I don't celebrate early, but I do enjoy the moment when a story stops making me the villain in someone else's script. Before bed I locked the connectors in the garage like trophies I hadn't asked for. On the way back in I saw a shadow pass behind Rick's curtain, then another. He didn't text. I slept badly anyway, and woke to a morning pretending rain had never existed. The first thing in my mailbox was a postcard with no return address. 3 words were scratched into the cardstock with something sharp and impatient: "Keep it dry." Underneath, a faint smear of clear sealant stained the paper like a fingerprint. Twice is coincidence. 3 times is a schedule. I pinned the card to my corkboard, photographed it for the file, and put the kettle on again. If they wanted an appointment, I'd be ready at 7:45. Long game rules are simple. You don't spring the trap early. You let the storm come to you. By the next morning, the quiet didn't feel like peace anymore. It felt like surveillance taking a smoke break. My phone buzzed before sunrise, a message from Mark. "Meeting today at HOA office, urgent." The word urgent in Mark's mouth usually meant someone had set a trash bin out 12 hours too early. But this message came with an attached photo, a screenshot from the HOA complaint portal. Someone had filed a violation against me for creating unsafe water pressure conditions resulting in property damage. Attached was the same doctored footage Nolan had labeled digitally non-conforming. The complaint had been submitted under a new account name, CarryBuild. The timing was perfect, submitted exactly 1 minute after the city office opened. Whoever was behind it wasn't sloppy. They wanted process, not chaos. The HOA office was a beige cube behind the post office, carpet that smelled like old rain and sanitizer. Mark looked exhausted, tie loose, eyes red from too many neighborhood wars. "Daniel," he said, "you're in deep again." He turned his monitor so I could see the formal complaint thread. The city's environmental division had received multiple citizen reports, all citing my address, all worded in identical bureaucratic language. The reports were nearly templated, some AI-driven precision behind them, sterile and confident. But one of them attached a photo that made my stomach clench, a close-up of my backyard fence, water dripping from the bottom plank, time-stamped 3:14 a.m. The angle was wrong for any neighbor's camera. Whoever took it had been on my property. Mark leaned back, rubbing his temple. "Look, man, I know you've been through hell with her, but this looks bad. The board has to treat it as official until it's disproved." He lowered his voice. "And it's not just the reports. Someone sent a group email to all HOA members claiming you're the reason Karen moved." He slid his phone across the desk. The subject line read, "The truth about our neighborhood bully." No signature, but the writing was unmistakable. Karen's cadence, her formal scolding tone, the full legal phrasing she'd used in every note she'd ever taped to my door. It was like she'd been resurrected through autocorrect. I asked him if the HOA could trace the sender. He said they'd already tried. The address bounced through a disposable relay server. "It's sophisticated," he said. "Whoever's doing this either has help or is way too good at making you paranoid." I smiled thinly. Maybe both. On the drive home, I noticed the gray Camry again, idling by the corner where the street curved toward the retention pond. Its rear light was still cracked. When I slowed down, it pulled away smoothly, turning onto Maple Ridge like it had somewhere innocent to be. I followed just far enough to catch the partial plate again, same numbers Nolan had traced. The driver wore a hood, head angled low. Not Karen. Too young. But the posture, that stiff purpose in every motion, looked learned. Apprenticed, almost. Maybe the nephew wasn't working alone. Rick was waiting in my driveway when I got home. He looked like he'd been up all night, eyes shadowed, jaw set. "It's starting again," he said. "You're not gonna believe this." He handed me his phone. A new video had been emailed to him from an anonymous address, subject, "Proof." The clip showed my backyard at night, faintly lit by my own security light. The angle was identical to the photo in the complaint. Same droplets, same timestamp, but this video included sound. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. Then my faucet hissed and the camera jolted, as if whoever filmed it had flinched. "It's layered," I said. "They took your footage, my audio, and her old trick. Whoever's doing this knows the pattern." We spent the next hour combing through every file on my security system. The newest video wasn't there. No missing timestamps, no tampered metadata. It had never been recorded from my end, which meant someone was splicing footage they'd captured weeks ago, maybe through hidden cameras Karen left behind. The crawlspace Rick had cleared out still haunted me. He swore he'd burned everything, but paranoia doesn't negotiate with memory. I suggested checking the old conduit pipes that ran beneath her house. Karen had rerouted wiring once before, probably to power her secret surveillance cave. If any of it connected underground, it could explain the phantom footage. Rick hesitated. "You think she's alive?" I shrugged. "People like her don't die, they delegate." That night, I stayed up late, lights off, listening. At 12:47, the motion camera pinged, backyard fence again. I muted my phone, crept to the window. A small silhouette stood just beyond the fence line, flashlight aimed down, sweeping along the ground. For a second, lightning illuminated a slick plastic sheet, maybe tarp, maybe rain cover, and I caught the glint of a brass fitting dangling from the person's hand. Then the light snapped off. I waited until the storm quieted before stepping outside. The grass was soaked, mud cold against my shoes. Near the fence, half buried, was a footprint, small, narrow, angled wrong for adult balance. A teenager. My pulse eased just enough to let anger back in. In the morning, I printed stills from the video, annotated the rain pattern Nolan had noticed looping, and emailed everything to him, Mark, and a city detective whose card I'd kept from last year's restraining order debacle. I didn't expect miracles, but at least the documentation would be undeniable. Around noon, Nolan called. "We cross-referenced radar data," he said. "The night your video claims to be from? No precipitation. It's a composite." He paused. "Whoever made this has access to official timestamp overlays. That's not something a bored neighbor does." While I was still processing that, Rick texted me 3 words. "She called me." I drove straight over. Rick was pale, jaw clenched. "Blocked number," he said. Voice sounded like hers. Calm, almost polite. She said, and I quote, "Tell Daniel the water remembers." Then hung up. He looked at me. "What the hell does that mean?" I didn't answer because I already knew. Karen used to say water reveals character. She'd told me once that runoff exposes the weak spots in any system. It wasn't a threat, it was philosophy. And now someone was repeating it like scripture. That evening, as thunder rolled again, I noticed something new. The gutters on Rick's house had been slightly adjusted, the downspout angle changed. He swore he hadn't touched them. When we checked, the screws were freshly tightened, the metal damp but not from rain. There was a faint smell of oil, industrial-grade lubricant, not something either of us used. We followed the line of the downspout to the drain. It stopped short by 2 inches, just enough for overflow to backtrack during a heavy pour. The exact setup I'd once used on Karen. Only this time, it wasn't revenge. It was bait. I spent the next few hours setting a countertrap. We rigged a pressure sensor to the hose valve and linked it to Rick's camera feed. If someone tried to tamper with it again, we'd get a silent alert. It wasn't about catching them, it was about timing. If the person behind this wanted proof of guilt, they'd try to recreate the scene, and we'd have the real footage ready. By midnight, the rain came down in earnest. I sat at my window, eyes flicking between the storm and the feed on my tablet. At 12:37, the motion alert buzzed. A figure approached the side of Rick's house, crouched by the drain, and pulled something from a bag, metal. Gleamed under lightning. The brass connectors. My breath caught. The person attached one to the spout, then unfurled a hose, old, patched, familiar green. Karen's old hose, the one she'd cut. I watched, numb, as the figure fixed it in place and began feeding it toward my yard. The camera zoomed in just enough to catch the gloved hand. No feminine ring, no delicate fingers. These hands were rough, male, deliberate. The nephew, maybe. Or someone finishing her work. I waited until the hose reached my property line before flipping the breaker to my floodlights. The figure froze, then bolted. I ran outside, rain slashing across my face. The hose lay coiled halfway between our driveways, the connector gleaming like bait. I picked it up, heavy and cold, engraved with a single new word: confess. Police arrived within 10 minutes. They combed the yards, found tire tracks leading to the pond service road, and recovered a duffel bag half submerged in mud. Inside, camera equipment, gloves, 2 spare connectors, and a printed photo of me standing on my porch holding coffee. Someone had taken it that morning. The detective didn't smile when I told him Karen had supposedly moved 400 miles away. "Then she's got someone working for her," he said. "Or someone finishing her obsession. Either way, this stops tonight." Rick and I watched from my porch as the cruisers rolled away, tires slicing through puddles. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, the kind that lingers like unfinished business. I turned the connector in my hand, tracing the engraving. Confess. Not a demand, an accusation. Someone was rewriting history one storm at a time. But they'd made a mistake. They thought I was still playing defense. I set the connector on the railing and smiled to myself. Tomorrow I'd let them think they'd won. Because when people like that start believing their script works, that's when they reveal who's really directing the show. The storm cleared by dawn, leaving behind puddles that mirrored a sky still bruised from lightning. The police had taken the duffel bag and promised to dust it for prints, but I'd already accepted what they'd find. Nothing usable. Whoever was orchestrating this new procedure too well. They wanted tension, not capture. When I stepped onto the porch, the brass connector from last night was gone. I hadn't moved it, and neither had Rick. The railing was slick with dew, but there were no footprints, no disturbances. Just an empty spot where the word confess had been gleaming 12 hours earlier. Rick came over with coffee, eyes red, voice hoarse. I didn't sleep, he said. Every time thunder rolled, I thought I heard someone in the crawlspace. He tried to laugh, but it landed flat. We both knew that kind of exhaustion. Any updates from the cops? He asked. I shook my head. They're pulling security feeds from the pond road. But if the guy ditched the car there, it's long gone. By mid-morning, the neighborhood group chat was already buzzing. Someone had seen the patrol cars, another speculated about a break-in, and one neighbor helpfully suggested we form a safety committee. The irony almost made me laugh. We'd already lived through one committee apocalypse. The last thing we needed was a sequel. But fear is contagious, and paranoia likes to wear a uniform. By noon, Mark had called an emergency HOA meeting at the clubhouse. The meeting room smelled of coffee and drywall dust. 15 residents sat in folding chairs, muttering over donuts like jurors who'd rather be anywhere else. Mark stood at the front with a stack of papers. "All right, folks," he began. "I'll make this quick. There's been an incident. Daniel's house was targeted last night. We're cooperating with the police." The murmur rose. A woman in a floral blouse raised her hand. "Is it true someone's been filming people?" Mark hesitated, glancing at me. "We believe there's a pattern of digital harassment connected to a former resident." That phrasing, "former resident," hung in the air like an exorcism. Across the room, someone whispered, "Karen?" A few others nodded. The name still carried static. I could almost see the collective memory playing in their eyes. Her clipboard, her fake citations, her shouting matches over trash bins. Mark continued, "Until we get confirmation from law enforcement, I want everyone to check their security cameras. Any suspicious vehicles, forward footage to me or directly to Detective Sloan." Then he looked at me. "Daniel, do you want to add anything?" I stood, cleared my throat, and said, "Whoever's doing this wants to rewrite history. Don't let them." It wasn't much of a speech, but it landed better than I expected. A few people actually clapped, softly, like an apology for all the times they hadn't believed me before. Afterward, as the room emptied, an older man I barely knew lingered. His name was Ralph. He'd moved in last year, quiet, widowed, mostly kept to himself. "You know," he said, "I've seen that Camry too. Parked by the pond around midnight some nights." He rubbed the back of his neck. "First time I thought it was just kids, but the driver's always alone. Sits there for an hour. Doesn't smoke, doesn't move. Just waits." He hesitated. "You might want to look at the drainage culvert by that spot. The old maintenance road back there leads under the neighborhood. Most folks don't know it exists." That evening, Rick and I drove out to the culvert. The road was barely a path now, overgrown and slick with mud. We parked a few yards away and followed the sound of trickling water. The culvert was wider than I expected, old concrete, cracked, half covered in vines. Someone had dragged planks across the opening to make a crude barricade. We pried one loose, and a faint metallic smell hit us. Inside, the tunnel stretched for 50 yards, maybe more, until it curved out of sight. A flashlight beam swept across a pile of debris, bottles, paper, and, half-buried near the wall, a small plastic toolbox. Rick crouched and flipped it open. Inside were spare camera batteries, a cracked phone, and a waterlogged notebook. I pulled it out carefully. The ink had bled, but a few lines were still legible. Test angle 4B, neighbor route, rain version B. On the last page, a name appeared faintly through the smudges. Connor. Rick frowned. "That's her nephew's name." He helped her install the gutters last year. Suddenly, the story made sense. The nephew had learned the layout, the systems, even the blind spots. When Karen left, he must have stayed in touch, maybe feeding off her bitterness. The fake footage, the coordinated reports, it was all his way of avenging her downfall. I pocketed the notebook, careful not to ruin what evidence was left. As we turned to leave, Rick's flashlight caught something else. A motion sensor mounted to the culvert wall, powered by a tiny battery pack. Someone had been using the tunnel recently. We heard a soft clink behind us, metal on stone. I spun around, light sweeping the darkness, but the tunnel was empty. My pulse thudded in my ears. "We should go," I said. Rick didn't argue. Back at my house, I laid the notebook open on the kitchen table under a fan. The ink continued to run, like the words were trying to escape before they could be read. Among the legible lines were addresses. Mine, Rick's, and 3 others, each with dates next to them. The last one was tomorrow. I called Mark immediately. "Get the police to that culvert," I told him. "It's where he's staging this." At midnight, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window again, rain whispering against the glass. Then my phone buzzed with an alert from the pressure sensor. Someone had opened the outdoor faucet. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch, heart hammering. The hose was gone. The entire reel. Only a wet mark on the siding remained. Across the street, Rick's porch light flickered twice, then went dark. I sprinted over, shouting his name. No answer. The front door was ajar. Inside, the air smelled damp, metallic. I called again, nothing. Then I heard it. 3 knocks from somewhere deeper inside. I followed the sound to the kitchen. Water dripped from the sink onto the tile, forming a small puddle that led toward the basement door. The knocks came again, hollow, echoing from below. I hesitated, hand on the knob, then slowly opened it. The basement was dark except for a faint glow from the corner, a phone screen lying face up on the floor, camera still recording. The image showed me standing in the doorway. I looked down at the actual phone and saw the red light still blinking. Someone had set it up minutes ago. "Rick," I called softly. Silence. Then, from the far end of the basement, a voice. "You shouldn't have touched her gutters." Male, low, uncertain. I swung the light around, catching the edge of movement, a figure in a soaked hoodie stepping backward toward the old utility sink. In his hand, a wrench. "Connor," I said. He froze, eyes wide. The resemblance was uncanny. Karen's bone structure, same rigid jaw, same trembling defiance. "She just wanted order," he said. "You turned her into a joke. You all did." His voice cracked halfway through, the edge of grief cutting through the anger. "You think she deserved that?" I kept my tone calm. "She destroyed her own life. Nobody made her do it." He shook his head. "You don't get it. She wasn't crazy. She was right. People need rules." He took a step forward, wrench tightening in his grip. I raised my hands slowly. "And this? The fake videos, the letters, the harassment. This is what? Justice." He hesitated, eyes darting to the hose coiled beside the sink. "Proof," he said. "They'll see what you did." He turned toward the faucet, starting to connect the hose to the drain line, recreating the storm. "You'll confess." Before he could finish, the basement door slammed open behind me. 2 officers stormed in, weapons drawn. "Drop it," one shouted. Connor froze, then lowered the wrench. The hose slipped from his hand, slapping the wet floor. They cuffed him without struggle. As they led him past me, he muttered, "She's still watching." When the cruisers pulled away, red lights fading into the rain, Rick finally appeared at the top of the stairs, pale and shaking. "He knocked me out," he said quietly. "Woke up tied in the laundry room." I nodded, too tired to speak. The house smelled like rust and fear. By morning, Detective Sloan called to confirm. Connor had been living out of his car near the pond. The videos, the notes, even the complaint filings traced back to a single laptop recovered from the culvert. "Looks like he built his whole campaign around her journals," Sloan said. He thought he was finishing her mission. I thanked him and hung up. Outside, the sky was clearing, sunlight pooling on the wet street like forgiveness. Rick stood beside me, bandage over his temple. "So it's over," he said. I wanted to believe him. But as I looked at the puddles shimmering across the asphalt, each one reflecting my house upside down, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, Karen was still smiling, proud that someone had finally enforced her version of order. And in that reflection, for just a second, I thought I saw her yellow poncho ripple in the wind. The morning after Connor's arrest felt like the first clear breath the street had taken in months. No flashing lights, no gossiping neighbors with coffee mugs and speculation. Just the normal hum of sprinklers and delivery truck. Peace. Real, unqualified peace. Or at least that's what it pretended to be. When something's been broken long enough, silence doesn't sound like calm. It sounds like a warning you can't hear yet. I stood by my porch railing, watching the sunlight burn the last of the puddles off the asphalt. Across the street, Rick was back on his ladder, hammering trim as if rebuilding the physical world could fix the mental one. Every few minutes he'd glance toward the cul-de-sac like he was making sure no ghosts were coming back. I couldn't blame him. Neither of us had slept much since the basement. By noon, Detective Sloan stopped by for a follow-up. He was the kind of cop who always looked mildly disappointed in the world, like it had failed some quiet exam only he remembered taking. He handed me a folder, Connor's written statement. "You might want to see this," he said. Inside were pages of cramped handwriting, half confession, half manifesto. The first line hit like a hammer. Karen didn't leave. She retreated. Sloan said they'd found notebooks in Connor's car, all filled with the same obsessive logic. He claimed Karen had been communicating with him online through a private forum for community safety advocates. He said she'd given him instructions, coordinates, even the phrasing for the fake city letters. But the thing was, Karen's digital footprint ended months before the first message appeared. Her accounts were inactive, her email deleted. "Somebody was pretending to be her," I said quietly. Sloan nodded. "That's our guess. We're tracing IP addresses now, but the kid's convinced it was real. Claims she recorded messages for him to find later. Voice clips. He played one on his phone. It was short, maybe 10 seconds, but the voice was unmistakable. Karen's clipped tone, that self-righteous rhythm that always made every sentence sound like a citation. "Connor, remember, water exposes truth. It reveals who lies beneath the surface." The audio had static, a faint hum, and the slightest digital tremor at the edges. Could have been her, or it could have been anyone with a decent AI voice generator. But hearing it still sent a chill up my spine. Rick walked over halfway through, wiping his hands on a rag. "That her?" he asked. Sloan nodded. "Maybe. The audio's been edited. We'll know more once the lab runs comparisons." Rick shook his head. That woman could haunt a voicemail. After Sloan left, I tried to go back to work, but concentration was impossible. I kept hearing that phrase, "water exposes truth," looping like an echo that didn't want to end. I opened my laptop and searched the phrase out of curiosity. Buried in the results was an old HOA newsletter from 3 years ago, back when Karen had been president. The article headline read, "Community Cleanliness. Water Reveals Everything." She'd used almost the same sentence. The text under it was about runoff and erosion, but the tone, control wrapped in concern, was pure Karen. She'd loved the metaphor long before she weaponized it. That evening, Rick called me over. He'd been going through his crawlspace again, because apparently we weren't capable of learning from trauma. "Found something," he said. He pointed to a metal box wedged behind a beam, half hidden by insulation. Inside was an old camcorder, the kind that still used minitape. We carried it upstairs, wiped off the dust, and dug an adapter out of his toolbox. When the image finally flickered onto his TV, both of us froze. Karen's face filled the screen. Rain jacket, clipboard, the porch behind her unmistakably mine. "This," she said in that familiar tone, "is documentation for record-keeping purposes. Evidence of non-compliance." She turned the camera toward my house. It was dated nearly 2 years ago. She walked around the property line narrating infractions, imaginary ones, like she was hosting a nature documentary about suburban anarchy. Then she pointed the lens at herself again. "Some people," she said, "need to be taught responsibility." She smiled, small and satisfied, then stopped the recording. Rick exhaled. She was building a case before she ever snapped. There were 6 more tape. Most were similar. Neighborhood walks, muttered commentary, occasional rants about order and accountability. But the last one was different. It was filmed inside her own house. Karen sat at her dining table, staring straight into the lens. "If anything happens to me," she said, "they'll claim it's my fault. But I know who started this. It's him." She paused, eyes narrowing. "He won't stop until I'm gone." Rick looked at me. "She meant you." I nodded slowly. Of course she did. But the timing didn't add up. The date on the footage was the week before her restraining notice, before the final collapse. She'd already rewritten reality in her head. Maybe that's why Connor's version had sounded so genuine. He wasn't delusional. He was inheriting hers. I copied the videos onto a drive and dropped it off with Sloan. He thanked me, though his tone said he wasn't sure whether to treat them as evidence or cautionary tales. Then, for the first time in months, I went to bed before midnight. I woke up at 2:19 a.m. to the sound of water. Not rain, steady, internal, like a faucet running. I followed it to the bathroom. The tap was open, full blast. I hadn't touched it. The sink overflowed slightly, water trickling down the cabinet edge in a thin ribbon. I shut it off, dried my hands, and checked every other tap in the house. The kitchen was fine. The outdoor faucet was dry. Just the one. Probably air in the pipes, I told myself. Probably. The next morning, Mark texted me a photo. Someone had placed a brass connector on the hood of his SUV overnight, engraved with a new phrase, "Found you." He wanted to know if it was a prank. I didn't reply. Instead, I drove straight to the police station. Sloan met me in the lobby, looking as tired as I felt. "It wasn't Connor," he said before I even spoke. "He's still in custody. But someone dropped off an envelope this morning addressed to you." He handed it over. Inside were printed photos of me and Rick from the HOA meeting, zoomed in, grainy. On the back of one was handwriting I hadn't seen since Karen's notes. Block capitals, perfect spacing. "Order is eternal." "Could be old," Sloan said. "But the ink's fresh." He sighed. "Either she's back, or someone's keeping her mythology alive." That night, Rick came over with a 6-pack, the kind of gesture men make when they don't know what else to do. We sat on the porch watching the street lamps flicker. "You think she's alive?" he asked. I didn't answer. "Because if she is, part of me wants to shake her hand," he said. "Woman planned this from the grave." I laughed, half because it was absurd and half because he was right. Karen had managed to turn her own collapse into legacy. Around 10, thunder rumbled again. No rain yet, just that heavy air before the first drop. I looked toward her old house. The windows were dark, but one curtain, upstairs left, shifted slightly. Wind maybe. Or maybe someone watching. Rick followed my gaze. "If she is out there," he said quietly, "what do we do?" I thought about it for a long moment. "We make it official," I said. "No more reacting. We document everything. Every note, every sound, every tap." By midnight, the storm finally broke. I set my camera facing the yard, one inside the hallway, one by the bathroom sink. If Karen, or whoever was pretending to be her, wanted to play with water, I'd give them plenty to watch. At 1:03 a.m., the sink turned on again. The bathroom camera caught the handle twisting slowly on its own, just enough for a thin stream to flow. Then, faintly, from the hallway mic, 3 knocked. When I reviewed the footage, I noticed something stranger. The shadow across the wall behind the faucet wasn't mine. It was taller, the outline warped slightly at the edges like heat distortion. I froze the frame and zoomed in. The shape wasn't human. It was an elongated reflection from the hallway mirror, angled perfectly toward the sink. A reflection of what? The camera caught only darkness. I sat back, heart thudding. Whoever this was, they'd studied the layout, the mirrors, the blind spots. It wasn't haunting, it was choreography. A game designed to make me doubt my own footage. Outside, thunder cracked again, closer now. I glanced at the monitors. Front yard clear, back fence still, bathroom empty. Then, as I turned away, a final motion alert blinked. The feed from Karen's old house, the one Rick had left running out of caution, flickered to life. Through the rain, a figure in a yellow poncho stood at the upstairs window, perfectly still, head tilted slightly toward my house. The timestamp read 1:07 a.m. I blinked, rewound, played again. The figure was gone. Maybe it was lightning. Maybe it was a reflection. But as the storm thickened and water began to drum against the gutters, I realized something I didn't want to say out loud. Whoever had inherited Karen's madness wasn't finished. They'd just learned to stand exactly where she used to. The next morning, the sun was out again, all brightness and denial. You'd never guess the night before had been soaked in thunder and paranoia. The street looked freshly washed, and the world, once again, was pretending to behave. But pretending was the neighborhood's favorite sport. I stood by the window longer than usual, half waiting for the curtain across the street to twitch again. It didn't. The house sat empty and perfect, its windows clean, its siding freshly painted, a good citizen in a row of houses that had all learned to smile after trauma. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that yellow poncho framed in the rain. Rick dropped by mid-morning carrying 2 coffees. He was smiling, but his eyes had the same restless energy I'd felt in my bones. "You see it too?" he asked without preamble. I nodded. "You're sure it wasn't reflection?" "I recorded it," I said. "Want to see?" We watched the footage on my laptop, both leaning close, the light from the screen throwing blue shadows across the kitchen counter. The figure appeared right at 1:07 a.m., motionless, head tilted slightly downward like a teacher assessing misbehavior. Then gone. Rick rubbed his neck. "Could be lightning," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Could be someone playing dress-up." "Could be Karen," I said. That shut him up. We spent the afternoon rewiring the outdoor cameras, upgrading sensors, extending coverage angles. If paranoia had a manual, we were following it chapter by chapter. By sunset, we'd turned our 2 houses into small fortresses of logic, every blind spot covered, every door logged, every light automated. If someone wanted to play ghost again, they'd have to do it under full floodlight and high definition. At 9, Mark stopped by with an update. Connor's interrogation had revealed another name, someone he claimed was the messenger. A woman who'd contacted him after his aunt's arrest, claiming to represent a community preservation group. She'd sent him money, instructions, and voice clips to continue the mission. The account was untraceable, routed through multiple proxies. "Could be Karen herself," Mark said quietly, "or someone obsessed enough to copy her." I wanted to tell him obsession wasn't contagious, but the evidence said otherwise. That night I didn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., my phone vibrated, a motion alert from Rick's yard. I opened the feed. Nothing. Just rain starting to fall again, soft and innocent. Then the camera glitched. Static, a flicker, and for a fraction of a second, the frame brightened unnaturally. A face appeared in the reflection of Rick's window. It wasn't Karen this time. It was a woman younger by decades, same eyes though, same smile that looked like a victory speech. Then the feed went dark. I ran outside before I had time to think. The rain hit my face like cold needles. Rick's front door was open, light spilling across the porch. "Rick," I called. No answer. Inside, the living room was empty. A half-finished mug of coffee sat on the counter, steam still curling. Then a muffled crash came from the basement. I grabbed the nearest thing with weight, a wrench off his workbench, and moved slowly down the step. Rick was there, standing in front of the fuse box, dripping wet. He turned when I said his name, eyes wide, confused. "Power's cutting in and out," he said. "Thought I saw sparks." "You okay?" I lowered the wrench. "You left the door open." "No," he said, frowning. "I locked it." We both froze. The air felt heavier than the storm outside. Upstairs, something clinked, a light tap of metal against glass. When we went up, the sound stopped. On the kitchen table lay a brass connector. Fresh. No engraving this time. Just polished, shining, deliberate. We called Sloane immediately. He arrived within half an hour, raincoat dripping, face set in the grim patience of someone who's been through too many stories that sound crazy until they aren't. "Connor's in a secure facility," he reminded us. "This isn't him." He examined the connector, bagged it carefully, and looked around the kitchen. "You sure no one else has access?" "Nobody," Rick said. "Front door was locked." "Then either someone has a key," Sloane said, "or something's wrong with your locks." He ran a gloved hand over the doorknob, frowned. "See that?" A faint residue shimmered under the flashlight, clear oil, industrial grade again. Same kind used on the adjusted downspouts. When Sloane left, the house felt smaller, the air thicker. Rick sank into a chair. "You think it's her, don't you?" he asked. I didn't answer. Because deep down, I'd already accepted the possibility. Maybe Karen wasn't dead. Maybe she'd gone underground, figuratively or literally, and found a way to keep playing conductor from the shadows. Maybe Connor had just been the first volunteer in her second act. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in months. I drove out past the city line, to the small coastal town where Karen had supposedly moved before everything went quiet. The address on her old forwarding file led to a narrow cul-de-sac of identical rental houses. I parked, stepped out, and knocked on the door marked 12C. A man in his 60s answered, bleary-eyed and annoyed. "Looking for Karen?" he asked before I even spoke. I nodded. "She left 3 weeks ago. Didn't say where. Just disappeared. Left half her stuff behind too." He let me look around. The place smelled like dust and damp wood. Boxes lined the walls, some open, filled with old paperwork. HOA letters, complaint forms, property diagrams. My name appeared on more than one. Near the back, under a stack of receipts, I found a torn notebook page with a familiar phrase written in neat block letters. "He'll see it when it rains." I left quickly, my stomach a knot of unease. On the drive back, the sky darkened again, thick, gray, almost green. When I pulled into the neighborhood, the first drops were already falling. Rick's truck was in the driveway, but his house was dark. My porch light flickered once, then went out. Inside, I tried the switches. Nothing. The power was down again. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped outside, and saw it immediately. Every downspout on both our houses had been redirected. Not damaged, redirected. The pipes had been unbolted and reattached to point inward, feeding runoff directly toward our foundations. I followed one line to the base of my porch, where it disappeared into a narrow hole freshly dug into the soil. Inside it, something glimmered. I crouched, brushed the dirt away, and found another brass connector. This one had words etched deeper than any before. "It's time." Lightning cracked overhead, and somewhere behind me, I heard Rick shout. I sprinted to his house. Water was already pooling near his steps, pouring down like a small waterfall from the roof. He stood by the doorway, yelling into his phone, trying to reach Sloane. I grabbed his shoulder, pulled him back as the gutter above buckled under the weight. Metal tore free, crashing down onto the porch. We worked fast. Cut the hoses, pried the downspouts loose, redirected the water before it could reach the crawlspace. By the time the storm passed, we were soaked and shaking, standing ankle-deep in muddy runoff. The street shimmered under the lightning like a sheet of glass. Rick was breathing hard. "This isn't random," he said. "She planned this." He gestured toward the connector in my hand. "She wanted this storm." "She's manipulating us," I said. "Every move we make, she's counting on it." We went inside to dry off. My power came back around midnight. I checked my cameras. Every feed frozen at 10:03 p.m., the exact moment the storm had peaked. The files had corrupted simultaneously, overwritten by static. I restarted the system, hoping to salvage something. When the screens flickered back on, a single image appeared across every feed, grainy, rain-warped, but unmistakable. Karen's front porch, empty except for a handwritten sign taped to the door. The words were simple, sharp, and perfectly legible through the distortion. Meeting tomorrow. Everyone attends. I stared at it for a long time, feeling my pulse crawl into my throat. Rick leaned over my shoulder. "Tomorrow's Sunday," he said softly. "HOA meeting day." I looked outside. The rain had stopped. The street was quiet again, washed clean, innocent as ever. But every puddle reflected the same thing. The porch across the street, the dark doorway, and that single word that no one else could read yet. Tomorrow. And in that reflection, faint and wavering, I thought I saw a shape move. Just a ripple of yellow disappearing behind the door. The storm wasn't over. It had just been rescheduled. When I woke the next morning, the air had that eerie calm that always comes before a storm, like the world holding its breath. The clock said 8:06. Sunlight slanted through the blinds, too clean, too bright, as if it didn't know what was coming. Across the street, Karen's old house looked freshly scrubbed by last night's rain, the porch gleaming, the taped note visible even from my window. Meeting tomorrow. Everyone attends. Except tomorrow was now today. Rick was already outside when I stepped onto the porch, coffee in one hand, shovel in the other, like he expected to dig up trouble before it found him. He pointed at the house. "Sign's still there," he said. "You think she, or whoever, posted it after the storm?" I nodded slowly. "Or before it. Maybe that was the point. The meeting was always today." We crossed the street together. The air smelled of wet wood and ozone. The sign was laminated, edges sealed tight, the handwriting identical to every note Karen ever left. Precise, stiff, deliberate. The same marker strokes, the same obsession with symmetry. I peeled it off the door carefully, half expecting a trap. Nothing. Just tape and ink. But when I turned it over, there was a single line on the back. "Truth comes with rain." Rick let out a low whistle. "She's consistent, I'll give her that." I forced a smile. Consistency is what got her dethroned. But inside, my pulse was thrumming. The phrase wasn't random. It was from one of her newsletters, the same issue that Nolan and I had found when all this began. Someone was echoing her words intentionally, methodically, like a sermon. At 9:30, Mark texted. "Emergency HOA meeting. Community Center. 10 sharp." No explanation, no details. Just that. I held up my phone. "Guess the invitation worked," I said. The community center was only 3 blocks away, a squat brick building that smelled like disinfectant and cheap coffee. Half the neighborhood showed up, soaked from drizzle that had started again. Mark stood at the front, looking every bit the reluctant mayor of a town gone sideways. "Thanks for coming," he said. "We need to address ongoing vandalism incidents, particularly those tied to last night's storm." People murmured, uneasy. I scanned the faces, some tired, some curious, all suspicious. Then Mark lifted a folder. "The police recovered a flash drive near the pond this morning," he said. "It contains video footage. Dozens of clips, apparently part of a blackmail attempt. Before I show anything, I need to warn you. It's disturbing." He plugged the drive into a projector. The lights dimmed, and grainy images filled the wall. Karen's voice echoed through the room, calm, righteous, unmistakable. "We enforce order because no one else will." Then came shots of our houses, our driveways, neighbors filmed at night, me, Rick, even Mark, each clip time-stamped months apart. Karen narrating in the background like a prophet documenting sinners. The room went silent except for the hum of the projector. Then the last video played. It showed Connor's culvert, his hidden base, and a woman standing beside him. Not Karen. Too young. Same face shape, same hair color, but sharper, colder. She looked straight into the lens. Phase 3 begins when the water rises, she said. Let them think she's gone. Let them see her reflection. Someone gasped. Mark stopped the video. The police believe this is the same woman who's been contacting Connor, the one calling herself the messenger. He turned to me. You saw her, didn't you? The night of the lightning. I nodded. In the window. A man in the back, Ralph, spoke up. So what is she? A copycat? Some cult thing? Mark hesitated. Possibly. The police are treating it as organized harassment. He rubbed his forehead. But there's more. This woman bought property, 2 towns over. Guess whose name was listed as a previous co-owner? He looked at me. Karen's. For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then rain began hammering the windows again, sudden, heavy, loud enough to drown thought. Thunder cracked overhead, and the lights flickered once, twice, then cut out. People muttered. Someone's phone flashlight clicked on, a weak cone of light slicing the dark. That's when my phone buzzed. One new message, no number. You should have stayed dry. Before I could show it to Mark, a scream erupted from outside. We rushed to the doors. The parking lot had flooded halfway, water rushing down the gutters like a stream. And there, half submerged by the curb, was a car, gray, cracked taillight, the Camry. The driver's door hung open. The seat was empty. Rick swore under his breath. She's here. Police arrived within minutes. Sloane's voice cut through the rain as he directed officers toward the culvert road. Lock down the area, he ordered. If she's playing copycat, she'll head for higher ground when it floods. He turned to me. You too. Go home, stay inside, lock everything. We drove back through the sheets of rain, wipers struggling to keep up. Every flash of lightning turned the street into a black and white film still. The same houses, same driveways, same old stage for whatever this was. When we pulled in, Rick's porch light was swinging wildly in the wind, clanging against the wall. Inside, the lights flickered again. I shut every curtain, checked every lock. The storm was getting worse, wind like static, rain so loud it blurred into white noise. Then, from the back of the house, I heard a faint metallic tap. 3 beats. Pause. 3 more. I followed the sound to the kitchen window. Water streamed down the glass, blurring the view, but behind it, a silhouette stood at the fence, small, still, watching. Lightning flashed. The yellow poncho gleamed once before vanishing. I ran for the door, but Rick's voice shouted from across the yard. Don't go out. He was standing by his truck, flashlight cutting through the rain. She's trying to pull you out. I stopped, heart racing. He was right. Every time before, every escalation, she or whoever wore her colors, had made me move first. React. Chase. That was her power. Control through chaos. So I didn't move. I just watched. The figure didn't. It waited, silent, until thunder drowned sight again. Then, from behind me, the house groaned, deep, hollow, unnatural. The foundation shuddered. I turned back toward the kitchen. Water was pouring in from under the back door, not rain but pressure, a burst from the old drainage line that Karen had once insisted on installing to redirect community runoff. She'd connected it to the same underground culvert where Connor had hidden his equipment. The pipe had never been capped when the system was repaired. The storm was flooding us from below. Rick was already at my side, grabbing towels, shoving them against the threshold. It's backing up fast, he said. I glanced at the sink. Water gurgled there too, rising slowly, steady as breath. Then I saw it, the glint of metal swirling in the water. A brass connector, caught in the drain, engraved with a single word, end. I yanked it out and threw it onto the counter. The rain outside was deafening now. We ran to the breaker panel and killed the main power before the water could climb higher. Then, through the static of the storm, came another sound, sirens, faint but closing in. When the police reached us, the water had stopped rising. They traced the overflow back to the culvert, where they found the real answer. A sump pump had been rigged there, timed to reverse flow during heavy rainfall. It was connected to a small generator, and beside it, an empty chair. On the seat lay a phone still recording, the same model Connor had used. The footage showed the woman from the earlier video, drenched, calm, smiling. "She taught me everything," she said to the camera. "I just had to finish the cleanup." They never caught her. The car at the community center turned out stolen, the plates fake. No fingerprints, no ID. Just one last trace, the same clear oil found on the lock. Sloane told me later she'd left a note at the culvert, scrawled in waterproof marker, "Order is restored." By the next morning, the storm was gone. The neighborhood looked almost peaceful again. Crews drained the standing water, patched the drains, and pretended nothing had happened. Mark sent an email thanking everyone for cooperation during the emergency. The HOA would meet again next month, he said, weather permitting. Rick came over that afternoon, both of us hollow-eyed but alive. "Think it's over?" he asked. I looked out at Karen's old house, its porch empty, its windows blank. "For now," I said. "But water always finds a way back." We stood there in silence until the mail truck stopped at the curb. The driver handed me a small envelope, no return address. Inside was a photo, my porch, taken that morning. In the corner of the frame, barely visible in reflection, was the edge of a yellow poncho. No message, no threat. Just proof. I burned the photo that night, along with every connector I still had. Watched the brass melt, the letters blur, the metal hiss like it was alive. When it was done, I poured the ash into the drain, turned on the faucet, and let the water carry it away. Sometimes I still hear the hiss at night, faint, almost nostalgic. Maybe it's the pipes. Maybe it's memory. Or maybe it's Karen, wherever she is, watching the gutters overflow and smiling at the order she left behind. The rain came again a week later. It always does. But this time, when it hit the roof and rolled down the drains, I didn't flinch. I just stood there, coffee in hand, listening. Because some storms don't end, they just wait for someone new to start them again. And somewhere, beyond the cul-de-sac, thunder answered like applause.